The wind screamed down the canyon like a banshee in heat, tearing across the jagged ridgeline where two horses stood tethered, skittish and wide-eyed. Moonlight cut silver lines through the red rock, and somewhere below, a scream shattered the silence. A woman's voice, high and broken, then nothing. Just the wind and the long fall into blackness. Rhett Holloway didn't move at first. He sat still in the saddle, hat low, rifle across his lap. He watched as dust settled near the edge of the cliff, where two silhouettes now turned away, laughing. One of them tossed a scarf into the air like it was trash. It fluttered once, caught the wind, and drifted down into the darkness. He gritted his teeth. Two men rode off into the night, their silhouettes swallowed by distance. Rhett waited until the echo of hooves vanished, then spurred his horse forward toward the cliff's edge. When he dismounted, he walked with purpose but no rush. The desert didn't reward panic. He knelt and peered down. About 30 feet below, clinging to a narrow outcropping, was a body. Or maybe a ghost. She wasn't moving. He couldn't tell if she was breathing. Rhett glanced back at his horse, then down again. He didn't sigh, didn't swear. Just unstrapped the rope from his saddle and got to work. Hours earlier, that same woman had stood under the glowing chandeliers of the Golden Jug Saloon, dressed in a crimson silk gown that fit her like it had been stitched by the devil himself. Her name was Lee May, and she sang with a voice that made grown men forget their drinks and blink twice. The piano man slowed when she walked past. Cards stopped mid-hand. Even the air seemed to pause. She wasn't just beautiful, though she was, and unapologetically so. She was fire in velvet skin. She was eyes that didn't flinch and lips that didn't beg. Silas Crane, the owner of the saloon, watched her from the bar like a man watching gold walk on two legs. He sipped slow from a glass of something expensive and held it like it deserved reverence. His smile had all the charm of a snake before the strike. "You'll be mine, darlin'," he'd said more than once. "All this," he gestured around the room, "whiskey, men, money, music, could be yours too. Just say yes." She never answered. Not with words. But the look she gave him could have peeled the paint off the piano. She wasn't from around here. That much was clear. She'd arrived in Dustwater 3 months ago, dusty and proud, with a small bag, a sharper tongue, and no patience for nonsense. Rumors said she was running from something. Others said she was looking for someone. What was known? She needed work, and Silas needed a new saloon act after his last girl mysteriously vanished. He made her an offer. She accepted, barely. But with conditions. She'd sing, she'd smile, but she wouldn't touch, and she damn sure wouldn't take orders. For a while, that arrangement held. Until it didn't. Tonight was the last straw. Silas had cornered her behind the saloon, his breath thick with bourbon and bad intent. He said he was done asking. Said tomorrow they'd announce their engagement. That she'd wear white, smile pretty, and become Mrs. Crane, or else. She spit in his face. His slap knocked her to the ground. And that's when he'd told his men to take her for a ride. No one in town would ask questions. Not about a woman like her. Not in a place like this. But someone was watching. Rhett Holloway had been riding the southern ridge, trying to avoid the damn town altogether. He didn't like people. Didn't trust them. He came into town only when the bullets ran low or the storms got too mean. But something about the music tonight had drawn him to the bluff. He heard it echoing across the rocks, carried on the wind like a memory he hadn't asked for. That voice, it didn't belong in a place like this. When he saw the two men dragging her toward the cliff, he knew. Knew what kind of town this was, what kind of men they were. Knew she didn't stand a chance. Now, the rope bit into his palms as he lowered himself over the edge. The rock was rough and the air stung his eyes. Below, she hadn't moved. He landed hard beside her, boots scraping the ledge. Up close, she was a mess of silk, bruises, and blood. One eye swollen shut. Lips split. Her breathing was shallow, but it was there. "Still with me?" he said, voice low. She didn't answer. Her fingers twitched. "That's enough." He worked quickly, tying her to him with a length of cord. She was lighter than she looked, but awkward in her limpness. It took every ounce of strength and leverage he had to climb back up. When he reached the top, he collapsed beside her, chest heaving. The stars above didn't care. Neither did the coyotes howling far off under a rising moon. Rhett carried her to his horse, settled her in the saddle, and climbed up behind. She didn't wake. Her head lolled back against his shoulder as they rode into the night, toward the canyon pass and the narrow trail that led to his cabin. He didn't know her name yet. Didn't matter. What mattered was this. A woman had been thrown away like garbage. He'd seen it before. In the war. In towns like this one. People with power taking what they wanted and burying the consequences in sand. He wasn't letting that happen tonight. The ride was long, quiet except for the jingle of tack and the occasional groan from his mare. The stars wheeled overhead. The night pressed close. Somewhere behind them, Dustwater slept easy. Rhett's cabin stood in a hollow near the creek. A rough place, stone, wood, and the bones of effort. He built it alone, after the war, after the funeral, after he walked west until he ran out of land. He carried her inside and laid her on his cot. Stripped the torn silk from her frame, cleaned her wounds with whiskey and boiled cloth. Her skin was dark with bruises, her ribs sore, her thigh cut deep. She stirred once, murmured something in Chinese. He didn't understand the words, but he knew the sound. Fear. Pain. Fury. She had fight left in her. He respected that. He didn't sleep. Sat by the hearth, cleaning his rifle, watching the firelight dance across her sleeping face. Every now and then, he glanced at the bloodied silk dress draped over a chair, wondering what kind of woman walked into Dustwater alone, dressed like royalty, and told the devil to go to hell. The kind of woman who got thrown off cliffs. The kind of woman who came back. Outside, the wind had died down. The coyotes stopped singing. Somewhere in the woods, an owl hooted once and fell silent. Morning would come soon. With it, questions, dangers, choices. But for now, Red Holloway stared into the fire and made one thing clear in his mind. Whoever had tried to bury her hadn't dug deep enough. Not nearly deep enough. Li Mei woke to pain, thick and clinging like smoke in her lungs. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was rough timber, not canvas. The air smelled like ash and pine, not whiskey and sweat. She blinked, slowly, her vision swimming. Then she felt the weight of bandages across her ribs, the sting of cuts stitched clumsily but clean. Her mouth was dry, her limbs heavy. She tried to sit up, winced, and froze when a voice spoke from the shadows. You move too fast, you'll tear those stitches open. She turned her head, too fast again, and saw the man from the cliff. The one who'd watched them. His hat was off now, dark hair pushed back, jaw rough with stubble. He sat beside a dying fire, cleaning a rifle with slow, deliberate care. His eyes didn't leave the gun, but she knew he was watching her all the same. She tried to speak, coughed instead. He handed her a tin cup of water. She drank. It tasted like metal and cold air, but she drank it all. What happened? She rasped. You fell, he said. Her lips twisted. That what we're calling it? He didn't smile. I saw two men throw you. Off the ridge above Dustwater. About 100 feet west of Dead Man's Arch. Her fingers clenched around the cup. Silas sent them. I figured. He leaned back against the wall, setting the rifle down. The silence stretched. She studied him now more closely. Broad shoulders under a worn canvas shirt, boots dusted with red clay, hands that looked like they'd built things, broken things. A scar cut across one knuckle. His eyes were the color of riverbed rock, gray, cold, unreadable. You live out here? She asked. He nodded. You always watch women get thrown off cliffs? That got a twitch from his mouth. Not quite a smile. Not quite not. Name's Rhett, he said after a moment. Rhett Holloway. Li Mei. He nodded again like he already knew. The cabin was small but well kept. One room, a stone hearth, shelves lined with supplies, tools hanging neatly along the far wall. The cot she lay on smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. There was a steadiness to the place, a kind of silent order. It felt old and private, like she'd stumbled into someone's secret. You stitched me up? She asked. He glanced at her side. Best I could. You'll walk again. Might limp for a bit. And if you hadn't seen it? You'd be dead. She lay back slowly. You didn't have to save me. No, he said. Didn't? Silence fell again. Outside, a wind picked up, rustling the pine trees beyond the window. Somewhere far off, a crow called once, sharp and solitary. Why'd you do it? She asked, voice low. He didn't answer for a long time. When I saw you fall, I remembered a woman I knew, he said finally. She stood up to men like that. It didn't end well. Li Mei didn't ask more. She closed her eyes. Her body hurt, but her mind ached more. Silas's face rose in her memory, sneering and drunk. The feel of his hand on her wrist. The way the men had dragged her, laughing like she was nothing. But she wasn't nothing. Not anymore. Over the next 3 days she healed slowly. Rhett didn't hover, but he didn't leave either. He kept the fire going, fed her broth, cleaned her wounds. When she could sit up, he offered her stronger food, beans, cornbread, coffee that tasted like grit and fury. She took it all without complaint. He didn't talk much, but she watched him. He moved with purpose, a quiet rhythm that made her wonder what kind of life he'd led before this cabin, before the silence. On the fourth day she managed to stand, bracing herself against the wall. He didn't rush to help, just watched with those stone eyes. "Need a cane?" he asked. She gave him a look. "I'd rather crawl." Stubborn. Surprised? No. That night she sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, the pain in her ribs dulled to a steady throb. Rhett sat across from her, whittling a piece of wood into something she couldn't quite identify. "Where you from?" he asked. "Shanghai." He raised a brow. "Long way from home." "Not far enough." She stared into the flames, the orange glow dancing across her face. "My father was a merchant. When the warlords came we lost everything. My mother died of fever. I took a boat to San Francisco. Thought maybe America would be different." "Was it? Different dirt? Same boots?" He nodded. She liked that he didn't offer pity. "And you?" she asked. "Union Scout. War ended, I didn't." She understood that better than she expected. In the days that followed she grew stronger. Rhett showed her how to walk the trail behind the cabin without spooking the mule deer. He taught her how to check snares, how to split kindling properly, how to listen for danger in the silence. She asked him to teach her how to shoot. He paused, then handed her his revolver. Her hands were shaky, but her aim was better than expected. "You done this before?" he asked. "No. But I watched. They trained at dawn and dusk." She practiced with intensity, her body still aching but her mind sharper than ever. Every shot was an act of reclamation. Every bruise a reminder she was not broken. On the 10th day, Rhett came back from a supply run into town with a strange look on his face. "They're talking," he said, tossing a sack of flour on the table. "Who?" "Everyone. Silas's men. Sheriff. Townfolk. They say you're dead. But someone saw a woman in red on the ridge 2 nights ago." Word spreading. Li Mei stood slowly, testing her balance. "Let them talk. They will. Until they ride up here looking." Her jaw tightened. "Then let them come." Rhett looked at her for a long moment. There was a weight behind his eyes she hadn't seen before. Something careful. Protective. "You think you're ready?" She met his gaze. "I have to be." That night she stood outside the cabin, barefoot in the cold dirt, staring up at the stars. Rhett joined her, arms folded, breath fogging the air. "They'll come for you, Li Mei," he said quietly. "Not just to hurt you. To make sure you disappear." She nodded. "Then they'll have to try harder." He glanced at her, something like a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Not warmth, not comfort, but respect. Inside, the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Li Mei returned to her cot but didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting heartbeats. She knew the silence wouldn't last. That dust water didn't forgive rebellion. That Silas wasn't done with her. But neither was she. The next morning, Rhett handed her a small parcel. Wrapped in brown cloth, tied with twine. "What's this?" she asked. "Yours now." Inside was a pistol. Polished, clean, balanced. She looked up at him. "Why?" "Because the next time someone tries to throw you off a cliff," he said, "you won't be the one falling." She held the gun like she'd held the microphone back at the saloon, steady, precise, ready to be heard. Later that day, a hawk circled overhead, crying once before vanishing into the horizon. Dustwater sat on the other side of those hills, waiting, coiled and cruel. But Li Mei no longer felt like prey. She was healing, changing, becoming. And the West, cruel as it was, had no idea what it had awakened. Dustwater never looked kind, not even under the softest dawn. The morning sun poured amber light over its warped rooftops and crooked porches, but the warmth stopped at the surface. Beneath the gold, the town was brittle and mean, like a rusted blade still sharp enough to cut. Silas Crane stood outside his saloon, a cigar clenched between yellow teeth, his gaze scanning the street like a man expecting a storm he didn't believe in. Behind him, the Golden Jug's windows flickered with lamplight, though it was barely past sunrise. Inside, the girls scrubbed blood from the floorboards. Another brawl last night, 2 drifters with too much drink and too little sense. He exhaled smoke and turned to Boyd, his right-hand brute and half-wit deputy when the real sheriff chose to disappear. "You sure?" Silas asked, voice low and coiled. Boyd nodded once, chewing on a sliver of jerky like it was the only thing anchoring his thoughts. Saw her plain as day. Red dress, hair like coal. She was standing at the edge of the canyon, looking down like she was searching for something. Then gone. "Could have been the wind," Silas muttered. "Wind don't wear silk." Silas spat. then flicked the cigar into the street. Then we didn't finish the job. He stepped back inside, slammed the door, and began loading his revolver. Meanwhile, miles outside town, Li Mei crouched in the tall brush, eyes fixed on a rabbit snare just beyond the pine line. She wasn't thinking about Silas or the golden jug, not in that moment. She was thinking about silence, how it moved, how it warned. The trap held nothing again. She rose slowly, dusting off her hands. Rhett leaned against a tree nearby, arms crossed. "You reset it wrong." "I followed your instructions," she said without looking. "You rushed the knots. Rabbit smart enough to smell haste." She turned toward him. "You want to try bleeding on a ridge and tying knots the next morning?" He chuckled, a low sound rare from him. "You're stubborn." "No," she said. "I'm alive." Back at the cabin, she cleaned the trap and started on breakfast. She moved with more ease now, her limp barely noticeable, her wounds healing into long, angry scars she never tried to hide. She liked pain in a way. Not for what it was, but for what it proved. She was still here. Still burning. Rhett placed a folded newspaper on the table. Dustwater Gazette. The front page held little of use, some nonsense about railroad talks and a church fundraiser. But the back held something worse. Crane offers reward for fugitive woman, accused of theft, attempted murder. Li Mei read it once, then again. She didn't speak. He watched her face change, quiet but seismic. "He's drawing them in," she said finally. "Bounty hunters," Rhett confirmed. "Guns with no questions." "I won't run." "I didn't think you would." She folded the paper precisely, like it had never mattered, and dropped it into the hearth. Then she picked up her pistol and began oiling it. That evening they rode into the canyons together, keeping low beneath the ridgelines. Rhett knew the terrain like it was part of his own body, where water flowed under gravel, where tracks faded, where a man could disappear and still breathe. They weren't running. They were watching. Across the divide, two riders camped under a fireless shelter. Li Mei watched them through a spyglass. "New faces," she said. "Bounty hunters," Rhett replied. "Hired or just hungry?" "Doesn't matter." She passed him the glass. "See the mark on the saddle?" he asked. She nodded. "Dakota brand." "Which means they're good. Fast. Efficient. Then we'll have to be better." Rhett lowered the glass. "You don't owe Dustwater anything." "That's where you're wrong," she said, quiet but certain. "I owe myself." He didn't argue. They rode back in silence, dust rising behind their horses like ghosts trailing in the dark. That night the fire cracked louder than usual. She sat closer to it, face aglow, fingers wrapped around a mug of bitter coffee. She looked at Rhett not as a stranger anymore, but as something harder to define. Ally, mentor, maybe something more, though she didn't name it. He spoke first. "You know what happens if you go back? They kill me. Or worse. Drag you back to the stage. Make you sing for the same men who watched you bleed." She didn't blink. "Then I'll go back armed." "You sure that's revenge and not pride?" She smiled faintly. "There's a difference?" He looked at her and for once didn't have an answer. The next morning they found tracks near the cabin. Hoof prints. Not Rhett's. Not hers. Too fresh. Too close. Rhett crouched beside the prints. Two men. Circle formation. Watching. Li Mei scanned the tree line. How close were they? Close enough to smell the firewood. She stepped back. "Then it begins." He straightened slowly. "No. Now we begin." They worked in rhythm. Rhett checked traps, reinforced doors, scouted blind spots. Li Mei trained with the rifle, practiced quick draws until her fingers blistered and her shoulder ached. By midday she could reload faster than most men could think. She'd never needed to be dangerous before. But now she took to it with the grace of someone born for sharp things. She cleaned her old dress that night, not because she wanted to wear it, but because it reminded her who she'd been. A performer, yes, but also a symbol. Silas wanted to erase her by making her his. She'd burn down everything before she allowed that. Rhett sat sharpening his knife. "I saw what he did to the last girl. The one before you. Her name was Ella. She fought too. What happened to her? They found her body near the river. Face down. Sheriff said she drowned. But she had bruises. Rope marks." Li Mei nodded. "Then I'm not just fighting for me." "No," Rhett said. "You're not." The next day they took the ridge trail overlooking Dustwater. From that high the town looked small. Manageable. Breakable. Li Mei watched it for a long time. "How many men does Silas have now?" she asked. "For I know. 2 new. And the sheriff? Paid off. Useless." She took a breath. The wind tasted like gunpowder and pine sap. "When I step into that town," she said, "I don't walk out unless it's over." He nodded once. "Then let's make it over." Later, back at the cabin, she found an old tin box beneath Rhett's bed. Inside were medals, war commendations, faded letters, a photo of a woman and a child. She held it up without asking. "My wife," he said, voice rough. "Little girl too. They died during the fever outbreak in '68. I went to war thinking I could fix things. Came back to ashes." She handed the photo back gently. "I'm sorry. I was too," he said. "For a long time." Then quietly, "But saving you, maybe I'm not anymore." Li Mei stared into the fire, heart thudding in rhythms she hadn't felt since before Dust Water. "I don't want to be saved," she said softly. He looked at her. "I know. I just want to help you burn it all down." And at that moment they weren't just two wounded people hiding from the world. They were a reckoning. And the town of Dustwater was running out of time. Dustwater breathed heat and suspicion as noon settled like a hammer. The air hung heavy, the sky a bleached canvas. Riders moved slower. Dogs barked less. Even the wind held its breath, knowing something was coming. Silas Crane stood behind the bar of the Golden Jug, his knuckles stained with tobacco and blood. He poured whiskey for a stranger, a bounty hunter with dust on his boots and a stitched scar from ear to jaw. "She's got a bounty now," Silas said, sliding the glass across. "Double if she's brought in silent." The bounty hunter didn't blink. Red silk dress. Long black hair. Fast with a pistol? Silas narrowed his eyes. "You seen her?" "Not today. But she's close." Outside the town creaked. Shop doors hung half open. The sheriff sat on his porch, hat tilted over his face, pretending not to hear the whispers. Women stayed indoors. Men lingered with rifles that hadn't been cleaned in years but were suddenly relevant again. Trouble was coming. And everyone knew who was bringing it. Li Mei stood just beyond the ridge, her figure blending with the rise and fall of the land. She wore her red dress, now tailored to fit under her gun belt, and boots borrowed from Rhett. Dust clung to her calves. Her braids swung behind her like a flag of war. She watched the town through narrowed eyes. Every movement. Every breath. The saloon loomed largest, its swinging doors like jaws waiting to snap. "I count 6 armed," Rhett said, lying beside her with a spyglass. "2 on the roof. Boyd at the front. Silas likely in back." She nodded. "I'll go through the front." He lowered the glass. "You don't have to do this alone." She turned toward him. "Yes, I do." His eyes held her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then I'll be where you need me." They rode halfway down the slope, leaving the horses tethered among the rocks. Dustwater was smaller than it seemed from afar. Close up, it smelled of rot and desperation. The buildings leaned like they were tired of standing. But every window watched. Li Mei walked down the main street, slow and deliberate. Her boots thudded against the earth. One hand rested on the butt of her pistol. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. And every step was a warning. Boyd saw her first. His mouth fell open. "She's..." He never finished the sentence. Her bullet caught him in the throat. He collapsed with a gurgle. The town exploded into noise, screams, boots stomping, rifles being cocked. She moved fast, ducking behind a trough, firing at shadows. Rhett was already moving along the roofline opposite the saloon. His rifle cracked once, clean, surgical. One of Silas's rooftop men fell hard, boots kicking uselessly before going still. Li Mei sprinted toward the Golden Jug, glass shattering around her. She burst through the doors with a shout. The room inside froze. A girl screamed. Silas stood behind the bar, eyes wide with disbelief and something close to fear. "You should have made sure I was dead," she said. Then everything erupted. Silas ducked as his hired gun drew. Li Mei dropped to her knee, fired once, center chest. The man fell backward over a table. She turned, dodging behind a pillar as bullets chewed through the air. Silas vanished into the back room. She followed. Behind the bar was a narrow hallway, lined with empty whiskey crates. She moved quietly now, breath measured, each step a coiled spring. The hallway opened into Silas's office, dark, close, reeking of sweat and old power. He waited there with a shotgun. "Figured you'd come for me," he said, voice tight. "That's the thing about women like you, never know when to stay buried." She didn't answer, just fired. The blast knocked the shotgun upward. His shot tore into the ceiling, wood raining down. She advanced, another shot hitting him in the leg. He screamed, dropped the gun, scrambled backward. "Mercy," he begged. "I'll leave." I'll vanish. You'll never hear my name again. She stepped closer. I already did that, she said. The next bullet silenced him. Outside, chaos still raged. Bounty hunters circled like vultures. One saw her through the office window and raised his rifle. But Rhett was faster. His shot snapped the man's head back, body crumpling into the dirt. Li Mei emerged from the saloon, smoke curling from her pistol. The townsfolk watched, wide-eyed, frozen. She's killed Silas, someone whispered. A boy pointed. She walked in alone. Rhett stepped down from the roof, rifle slung casually. He met her in the street, wordless. The silence between them spoke louder than anything. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, hat in hand, eyes darting like a nervous horse. I assume this means things you'll be changin' around here, he stammered. Li Mei turned toward him, eyes hard. Clean your badge. Or give it to someone who will. The sheriff swallowed hard and nodded. Then she turned to the people. The shopkeepers, the bartenders, the mothers and miners who'd once looked away as she bled. This town protected a monster, she said, and let others suffer for it. No one spoke. But now you get to choose. What kind of place you want Dustwater to be? Still silence. Then a voice from the back. What about you? You stayin'? Li Mei looked toward Rhett. He didn't answer. Just waited. She shook her head. No, she said. My fight here's done. She holstered her pistol and walked back toward the ridge. Rhett followed. They didn't speak again until the town was far behind them. You could have stayed, he said. I would have just become another legend they'd twist. He nodded. They stopped at the top of the ridge, wind tugging at their clothes. What now? He asked. She stared into the horizon. The land stretched endless, red cliffs, golden plains, and the shimmer of heat that hinted at rivers far off. I don't know, she said. But I won't hide any more. He offered her a canteen. She drank, then passed it back. I lost everything once, she said. Then I lost myself. But not this time. He watched her quietly, then spoke. You didn't lose yourself. You were stolen. Now you're taking it back. She smiled just slightly. And with the sun behind them, they rode on, toward no place in particular. Toward every place that might offer a beginning. Dustwater faded behind them. And the legend began to ride. The desert didn't forget. It kept echoes in its rocks, blood in its dust. The wind carried stories farther than voices ever could, and out here, the tale of a Chinese woman who walked into hell and set fire to it traveled faster than bullets. But stories, especially ones built on pain, never ended clean. There was always another rider. Another reckoning. Li Mei felt it days before it came. A stillness in the wind, as if the land had begun to hold its breath again. She and Rhett had set up camp near a dry creek, shielded by cottonwoods and a wall of stone. At night, coyotes howled and the stars blinked like wary eyes. She slept with her pistol under her blanket, always pointed west. They lived simple. Caught rabbits, traded at border towns, kept their names low. But peace was thin out here, more like a silence between thunderclaps. One morning, as dawn peeled the sky open, Rhett stood over the fire sharpening his knife. Li Mei sipped coffee, watching the light catch in the curve of his blade. She could feel it then, something invisible but heavy. He didn't look up. They're coming. She didn't ask how he knew. By noon they saw the first dust trail. Riders. 3. No badges, no banners, just leather, grit, and guns. Mercenaries. The kind drawn by money and fear, not law or justice. Bounty? She asked. Or revenge? He replied. She rose and began packing. She'd learned by now not to waste time hoping they'd pass. They never did. But something inside her didn't want to run. Not this time. They'll track us to the canyon pass, Rhett said. We could circle wide. Lose them by nightfall. She tied her braid tight, pulled on her coat. No. We end it. He didn't argue. Just looked at her long enough to remember every scar, every fire in her gaze. They moved out on foot, rifles slung, keeping low along the scrub. By twilight they reached the pass, a narrow gorge with only 2 ways in or out. The perfect place for a last stand. The kind men wrote songs about and then forgot unless the ending was good. They laid their traps. Wires, loose stones, dry brush to mask the scent. Rhett took position high behind a ledge. Li Mei waited below in the shadow of the rock, pistol in one hand, knife in the other. She could feel her heartbeat in her teeth. The riders came just after dark, slow and cautious. They dismounted, sensing the trap but not the truth. One step too far. The wire caught his boot and the hillside answered, stones tumbling, breaking, crushing. He screamed once, then not again. The other two ducked for cover, firing into shadows. Their bullets struck only dust and ghost echoes. Li Mei didn't flinch. She moved like smoke. Her first shot hit the second man in the thigh, spinning him into the rocks. She closed the distance fast, knife flashing. He raised his gun but not in time. Her blade found his throat. The last rider turned, saw her too late. Rhett's rifle cracked once, clean through the skull. Then silence. No more footsteps. No more vengeance. Just the sound of wind curling through death. She crouched over the body of the man she'd killed, his blood painting the rocks beneath them. She didn't feel proud. She didn't feel much at all. Rhett came down slowly. "You all right?" She stood. "I'm tired." He nodded. "It's over. For now." "No," she said. "Not yet." They burned the bodies. Not out of cruelty but necessity. Vultures and coyotes weren't picky, and the desert didn't bury things, it revealed them. The next morning they rode east. The desert turned to prairie, the hills flattening into wide stretches of gold. Li Mei said little. Her mind spun with old ghosts and names she hadn't spoken since childhood. Her mother's voice. Her father's quiet hands. They'd crossed oceans for dreams. She'd crossed death for survival. She knew now she wasn't running from dust water. She was running toward something else, something she had to claim. They reached the town of Hollow Bend by nightfall. A rough-edged place, smaller than dust water but cleaner, quieter. Law still meant something here. Children played in the streets. Horses were brushed. And the sheriff didn't flinch at a woman in a red dress. They found a room above the inn. Rhett leaned against the wall while she washed her face in the basin, staring at the woman in the mirror. Her eyes were sharper now. Her skin bore the sun's wrath. But there was something new too. Resolve. "I need to speak to the judge tomorrow," she said. Rhett raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "My name. My record. I won't live in shadows anymore." He nodded. "And after?" "I teach. I build. I take back what was stolen." Rhett crossed the room. "And me?" She looked at him fully. "You do what you've always done." He smiled faintly. "What's that?" "Stand beside me." He stepped forward and kissed her. Not rushed. Not hungry. Just real. Like a man anchoring himself to the present. She didn't pull away. Later that night they lay in silence. Wind brushed against the shutters. Somewhere outside, a piano played a slow tune. "I thought revenge would feel better," she said softly. "It never does," he replied. She turned toward him. "Then why does anyone chase it?" "Because it feels like the only thing that listens." She touched the scar along her ribs. The one Silas left. It didn't burn anymore. It itched sometimes, but only when she thought about stopping. The next morning she went to the courthouse. Walked in alone. Faced a man behind a desk who knew nothing about her story. She spoke clearly, listed every false charge, presented the facts, signed the affidavit. An hour later she stepped outside into sunlight that didn't seem to judge her anymore. Rhett waited on the steps, a satchel over his shoulder. "Well?" he asked. "I'm clean." He handed her a folded paper. "A map." "Thought we might head north," he said. "There's land near Bitter Creek. Fertile. Isolated. We could start something." She took the map, eyes scanning the lines. Then she looked up at the sky. It was blue, endless. "I like that," she said. They rode out after noon, passing fields and rivers and people who didn't know their names. She didn't need to tell the world what she'd done. It already knew. It carried it in the dust. In the legend. At the top of the last ridge they paused. Behind them, dust, water, and everything it meant. Ahead, nothing certain but everything possible. Li Mei turned her face into the wind. She wasn't the girl from the saloon anymore. She wasn't Silas Crane's survivor. She was something else. A flame that refused to die. And in the wild stillness of the frontier she finally understood. This wasn't her ending. It was her beginning.